Spy tried to kill Ibrahim Traoré, but it ended in total disaster. The sun hung lazily over the military base, casting long shadows beneath the ancient mango tree that stood at the heart of the compound. Beneath it, a small group of senior officers and advisors gathered in a loose circle. The air was thick with the heat of midday, but their focus was sharp. The quiet murmur of voices was broken only by the rustling leaves above and the occasional whisper of the wind. In this setting, President Ibrahim Traoré, ever calm and composed, sat among his men, awaiting the details of an upcoming operation in the eastern regions of Burkina Faso. It was a routine meeting, or so it seemed. The officers spoke in measured tones about logistics, troop movements, and equipment needs. These were familiar discussions, and the weight of the conversation was something that had become second nature to Traoré. As the group exchanged information, he sat back, listening carefully, offering the occasional nod. His hands, well acquainted with the weight of leadership, were folded neatly on the table in front of him. The meeting was progressing as expected, with no sign of disruption, no indication that something dangerous was quietly brewing within the very circle of men he trusted most. Among the usual camaraderie, a simple soldier entered the gathering, carrying a tray of spiced tea. The warmth of the beverage was a staple in these meetings, a small but meaningful act of hospitality that had become part of the president's routine. Tea was served as a quiet gesture of respect, a symbol of the unspoken bond between the leader and his men. Traoré smiled as the soldier set a small, ceramic cup in front of him, just as it had been done 1,000 times before. He picked it up with the practiced care of someone who had tasted such tea countless times, grateful for the brief pause it offered in the midst of duty. But something was different today. His eyes scanned the room briefly, noting the faces of the men around him. His gaze lingered on the soldier who had delivered the tea. The young man, dressed in plain clothing instead of the usual uniform, seemed anxious, almost too careful in his movements. He gripped the cup with both hands, his fingers trembling slightly, as though the weight of the simple act was more than he could bear. Traoré, sensing the subtle shift, hesitated. There was something unsettling about the nervousness in the soldier's eyes. It wasn't enough to raise immediate suspicion, but it was enough to cause a slight pause in the president's otherwise steady hand. As he sat there, holding the cup, an old lesson from his training surfaced in his mind. Traoré had learned early on, from a world of military strategy and survival, that sometimes the most dangerous threats were not the ones that arrived with guns or bombs, but those that came with a false smile, a delicate handoff, a cup of tea. He had seen the quiet power of betrayal, how it could lurk in the most mundane moments, masked by the everyday rituals that men of power often took for granted. It wasn't the first time he had felt an uneasy chill in the pit of his stomach, and it would not be the last. Still, he smiled. He nodded his thanks to the soldier and held the cup in his hands, not yet bringing it to his lips. His eyes met Colonel Yaya Konates, the man seated across from him. Konate was an old ally, a figure who had stood by Traoré's side for many years, a man known for his sharp mind and cold, calculating gaze. But even in Konates' face, Traoré saw something different today, something that was harder to place, but undeniable. A flicker of tension, quickly masked, but it didn't escape the president's notice. He had learned long ago that one could only trust so much in appearances. The moment dragged on, the silence between them stretching thin, charged with an energy that could not be ignored. The circle around them continued to speak, but Traoré's mind was elsewhere, focused on the feeling that something was amiss. His instincts were telling him to wait, to look deeper, and so he did. The first warning had come hours earlier, when Traoré was in the safety of his office, preparing for the meeting. He had been scanning through reports, his focus broken only by the quiet hum of his office's air conditioner, when a small, folded note was slipped onto his desk. It had been left there without a sound, and the sender was unknown. A simple piece of paper, torn from a notepad, the writing small and urgent. Watch your tea today. They will test your trust. No signature, no clue about the identity of the messenger, just that stark, ominous warning. A message meant to unsettle, A note meant to be a signal that not all was as it seemed. It could have been a trick, a false alarm, or a genuine threat. But Traoré knew better than to ignore such things. He had been in power long enough to recognize the signs of an attempt, even before it materialized. He did not discount it. He did not laugh it off as paranoia. Instead, he made the conscious decision to play along. The meeting proceeded as planned. His mind was sharp as ever, his voice calm and steady. He engaged with his officers as though everything was normal, making sure to maintain the appearance of ease, to offer no indication of the danger he sensed looming in the background. He smiled, nodded, and contributed to the discussion, even as his mind whirred with calculations of a different sort. In his hands, the teacup seemed to carry the weight of his decision, of the possibility that it could be the vessel of death or survival. He didn't trust anyone blindly anymore, not after everything he had seen. Even those who had sworn loyalty could be swayed by money, by power, or by fear. Traoré knew that. He had seen men, once honorable and trusted, become dangerous enemies when ambition overcame their sense of duty. This was not a world of simple diplomacy or peaceful negotiations. It was a world of shadows, of hidden hands pushing for control in the silence of the night. Yet, Traoré continued to play his role, carefully maintaining the appearance of routine, careful to keep his thoughts from showing. He watched Connate and the others, waiting for the first sign of movement. The teacup, a simple object, now symbolized the test of his leadership. What would he do with it? How would he respond? Connate's voice broke through his thoughts as the colonel raised his cup. "Please drink, sir," Connate urged, smiling slightly. His eyes met Traoré's, an almost playful challenge in them, as if daring the president to take the first sip. It was a polite gesture, but to Traoré, it felt like more than that. It felt like a trap, a test of his loyalty and trust. His hand remained steady, the cup still untouched. And then, the silence hung heavy between them. The moment stretched on, fraught with tension. Traoré's eyes did not leave Connate. The colonel's calm smile never wavered, but there was a subtle change in his demeanor. His eyes were cold, calculating, the way they always were when he was deep in thought. But today, Traoré could see something else. Something he couldn't fully place but felt in the air around him. The teacup, innocent and unassuming, had become the center of everything. It represented more than just tea. It was a symbol of power, of trust, of fragility. A simple object, but one that carried the potential to decide the course of the day, the direction of the president's life. And yet, Traoré did not move. His fingers remained wrapped around it, feeling the cool ceramic, his mind racing. Colonel Connate, ever the one to move quickly when things needed to be done, took the first sip, his actions quick and deliberate. He looked at Traoré, his lips curling into a tight smile, as though trying to coax the president into following his example. "Please drink, sir," he repeated, the words seemingly harmless, but the underlying meaning clear. Yet, Traoré did not respond. He placed the cup slowly back on the table, his fingers brushing the rim gently. The gesture was subtle, but to anyone who knew him, it was clear. This was a signal, a sign of something unspoken. Captain Zongo, who had been seated in the back, took notice of the president's hesitation. His eyes flicked to the table, then back to the president, his expression unchanged but sharp. Zongo understood the signal instantly. It was a silent command, a message exchanged between two men who had spent years working together in the shadows. Zongo was no stranger to betrayal, and he knew the smell of danger when it lingered in the air. The president had detected something, and Zongo knew the next steps would be crucial. As the conversation continued, Traoré's mind remained sharp, his focus on the soldier who had served the tea. The young man, the one who seemed so nervous and out of place, had become the focus of his attention. Traoré didn't need to say a word. His instincts had already picked up the faintest hint of danger. The warning had been clear, and now the test had begun. The president's hand rested on the table, calm and steady, but inside he was already calculating his next move. The subtle shift in the air, the hesitation in the soldier's eyes, These were the signs he had been waiting for. The teacup was no longer just a symbol of trust. It had become a weapon, and the president was prepared to use it to strike back. Before we dive into the next part of the story, we have a small but big request. Party Popper, we're on a mission to reach 1,000 subscribers, and we know that with your support, we can make it happen. Rocket, without your help, it's impossible to bring this dream to life. So please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and be a part of our journey. And hey, we'd love to hear from you. Speech Balloon, drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you love Ibrahim Traoré as much as we do? Let us know what you think. Backhand index pointing down. Thank you for being with us. Now, let's jump back into the action. Fire. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating, as the young soldier was escorted away from the meeting by 2 armed guards. His hands were bound tightly behind his back, and his eyes were wide with terror. His mouth quivered, struggling to find words, but no one offered him a chance to speak. No one cared for his excuses. In the midst of the confusion, Colonel Konate, still seated at the table, tried to maintain his composure, though his face had gone pale. President Traoré did not speak immediately. Instead, he stood silently, watching the unfolding scene with a mixture of calm resolve and calculated precision. His eyes never left Konate's face, studying the colonel's every twitch, every movement. The room was utterly still, save for the subtle rustling of the leaves in the distance. The birds had fallen silent, as if even nature itself sensed the gravity of the moment. "There's a poison in that cup," Traoré finally said, his voice smooth, low, and devoid of any emotion. His words sliced through the silence like a blade. The rest of the officers froze, their faces a mixture of disbelief and confusion. They had watched the scene unfold but hadn't understood the depth of the danger. "This is worse than any enemy I have fought," Traoré continued, his gaze turning to Konate. "The enemy within is always the most dangerous." Konate opened his mouth to protest, to offer some form of defense, but Traoré silenced him with a single, sharp look. No words could undo what had just transpired. It didn't matter if Konate was involved in the plot or not. This act of betrayal, the attempted poisoning, spoke louder than any defense could. With a quick gesture, Traoré called for one of his aides. A small pouch was placed on the table before him. It contained a vial, small and inconspicuous, but within it was the weapon that had almost taken his life. The XT-42, a slow-acting neurotoxin designed to be colorless, tasteless, and odorless. The tiny plastic vial was enough to kill a man within minutes, and it had been hidden in the sock of the young soldier who had served the poisoned tea. The attempt had failed, but the message was clear. Someone had tried to kill the president from within his own ranks. As Traoré stood, staring at the vial, his mind raced. This was not just an assassination attempt, it was a message. Someone wanted him gone, and they were willing to go to great lengths to ensure his death. But the president was unshaken. He had dealt with treachery before, and this would be no different. The question now wasn't who tried to kill him, but why and who was behind it. The discovery of the poison, though shocking, was merely the beginning of a much larger conspiracy. Traoré's instincts told him that Colonel Konate wasn't acting alone. The way the poison had been introduced, the meticulous planning, and the apparent inside knowledge pointed to something more sinister. Traoré had led soldiers through real battles, but this was a war fought in shadows, with betrayals that ran deeper than he could have anticipated. As the young soldier was held in custody, Traoré's team moved quickly to investigate. Captain Zongo, one of Traoré's most trusted officers, was put in charge of the investigation. Zongo's sharp mind and unwavering loyalty made him the perfect candidate to dig into the details. Hours of questioning the soldier, along with forensic analysis of the notebook found in his bag, led to an even more disturbing discovery. Inside the notebook were names, coded messages, and a record of transactions, one of which stood out above the rest. It was a large sum of money, transferred just days before the assassination attempt, and it was linked to a name that Traoré had heard only in passing, a name that rang with danger: Le Chacal, the Jackal. This name was more than just a whisper in the wind. Le Chacal was known to be a shadowy figure, an enigma tied to foreign intelligence circles. His influence stretched far beyond Burkina Faso, and his operations were murky at best. He was a man whose face was never seen, his true identity a mystery to everyone except those who worked for him. The name Le Chacal had come up once before, in an intercepted phone call months ago, but Traoré had dismissed it as unimportant. Now, however, it seemed clear Le Chacal was involved in the plot against him. The discovery of Le Chacal's involvement sent shockwaves through the palace. Traoré realized the scope of the danger he was facing. This was no longer an isolated attempt on his life. It was part of a larger, well-coordinated effort to destabilize the country. And the man behind it all was someone who operated in the shadows, using others as pawns to do his bidding. Traoré wasn't just dealing with a traitor in his midst. He was now facing a powerful and elusive enemy who had no qualms about using deadly force to achieve his goals. Traoré knew that he couldn't rely solely on the information from his officers. This needed to be a covert operation, one that moved swiftly and silently, without alerting the enemy to his plans. Le Chacal was a master of hiding, a ghost in the world of intelligence, and Traoré knew that he couldn't afford to give him any advantage. The operation, dubbed Glass Eye, was set into motion. Traoré assembled a small team of his most trusted men, including Captain Zongo, 2 counterintelligence officers, and a civilian cyber expert who had worked on previous investigations. The plan was simple: track down Le Chacal using every available resource, but do so quietly, without revealing their intentions. They would need to blend into the background, becoming shadows among the people, in order to uncover the elusive assassin. Zongo and his team began their surveillance in Ouagadougou, focusing on a luxury apartment building known for housing diplomats, foreign business workers, and international aid contractors. The building's lack of security cameras made it an ideal hiding place for someone like Le Chacal, who thrived in secrecy. The operation's success hinged on getting close to the target without detection, and that meant blending into the city's daily life. Over the next few days, the team infiltrated the building using a variety of disguises. Some posed as cleaners, others as fruit sellers, and one officer even posed as a repairman to gain access to the building's internal hallways. The goal was simple: gather any information on Le Chacal's movements, monitor his behavior, and track his communications. The city of Ouagadougou was large, and the web of connections Le Chacal had weaved was complex. But Traoré's team was patient and precise. It wasn't until the 3rd day that they got a break. Le Chacal made a mistake, a small but crucial one. He ordered food to be delivered to his apartment. This was the opening they needed. Zongo, disguised as a delivery man, was tasked with the delicate mission of getting close enough to gather any information he could. When Zongo entered the apartment complex, his heart raced. He was about to get the first solid lead on the man behind the assassination attempts. As the door opened, Zongo faced a tall, pale-skinned man with sharp features and dark glasses. A man who did not belong to any official embassy staff, but who had a key to the apartment that matched the signal from the burner phone. His demeanor was calm, his movements precise, but Zongo knew this was the moment. The food was handed over without incident, but Zongo had already slipped a small listening device into the man's apartment. The device would provide crucial information about Le Chacal's connections and plans. That night, as the team reviewed the recordings, they finally got the breakthrough they needed. The man's voice was unmistakable. His name was Alexander Morel, a French intelligence officer, officially retired, but with ties to secret operations in West Africa. The ghost, Le Chacal, was no longer a shadow. He was Alexander Morel, the man who had orchestrated the attempts on Traoré's life. With the identity of Le Chacal now confirmed, President Traoré knew that it was time to set the final trap. Alexander Morel, the French intelligence officer, was the key to unraveling the entire plot. He had lived in the shadows, using his position and his carefully constructed identity to remain untouchable. But now, with the listening device in place, Traoré had the means to bring him to light. The plan, codenamed Operation Glass Eye, was set into motion. Traoré's team, which included Captain Zongo and his most trusted officers, carefully crafted a scheme to lure Morel into the open. The operation would take place under the guise of a quiet, high-level dinner at the presidential villa. The dinner would be an exclusive, invitation-only affair, attended by a select few trusted individuals, all of whom were loyal to Traoré. The aim was to send a signal to Morel. He had been using secrecy and subterfuge to carry out his assassination attempts, but now it was his turn to be hunted. The dinner would provide the perfect opportunity for Traoré to lure the assassin out, under the guise of a diplomatic gathering. Word of the event would be spread quietly through the usual channels, ensuring that the message reached the right ears. The palace kitchen was taken over by counterintelligence officers disguised as chefs. Every utensil, every dish, every cup was meticulously checked and prepared, ensuring that there would be no room for error. Hidden microphones were planted in various places around the room, under the dining table, inside the flower vases, and even within the salt shakers. No movement would go unnoticed. The security was tight, and nothing was left to chance. As the evening of the dinner approached, Zongo and his team kept a close watch on the apartment building where Morel had been staying. They saw no movement from the apartment, but they noticed something crucial. Morel's phone activated again, sending a message across the city. It was a clear sign that he was preparing to make his move. The trap was now set, and all that remained was for the assassin to take the bait. The dinner began without incident. Traoré sat at the head of the table, dressed in a modest traditional tunic, a subtle way to avoid making himself a target. His eyes were sharp, his mind constantly calculating the next steps. The guests were all carefully selected, loyal to him, and fully aware of the covert nature of the event. No press, no public announcements, just a quiet gathering, surrounded by the hum of discreet surveillance. As the meal progressed, Traoré remained calm, his gaze occasionally shifting toward the doorway. Every entrance was monitored, every guest scrutinized, and every waiter closely observed. He had already been informed that one waiter did not belong to their staff. This was no ordinary service personnel. This man had been placed there deliberately, and Traoré was certain that this was the moment of reckoning. When the waiter arrived with a tray of drinks, the tension in the room heightened. The man's movements were too calculated, his calm demeanor a dead giveaway. His right hand trembled ever so slightly, a subtle but telling sign of someone who had been trained to maintain composure in the face of danger. But still, his nerves betrayed him. Traoré's eyes locked onto him immediately. There was no mistaking the man's identity. "Would you like to share a drink with your president?" Traoré asked calmly, his voice carrying a sharp edge that cut through the silence. The words were deliberate, testing the waters. The man hesitated, but he did not speak, his eyes narrowing slightly, realizing the danger he was in. "I know who you are, Alexander," Traoré continued, standing up slowly. "You've been running for a long time, but you made one mistake." In a flash, the room erupted into action. Guards burst through the doors, moving in unison. The man tried to reach for something hidden in his sleeve, something small, sharp, but he was too slow. Zongo, ever watchful, had already moved behind him, pinning him to the ground before he could make a move. Traoré approached the subdued Morel with calm precision. The assassin's face, once poised and confident, now twisted in rage and frustration. "No gun?" Traoré asked, his voice tinged with mockery. "Just poison again? You really thought the same trick would work twice?" Morel didn't answer. He just glared at the president, his face pale with anger. Traoré leaned in closer, speaking softly. "You've made enemies you cannot fight." The moment had come. Morel was captured, but Traoré knew this was only the beginning. There would be no public display of justice, no parade or spectacle. He would not give them the satisfaction. Morel would be dealt with quietly, swiftly, and without fanfare. As the guards dragged him away, the rest of the room sat in stunned silence, the realization of what had just transpired sinking in. The assassination attempt had failed, but the message was clear. Traoré was not to be taken down so easily. As the dinner wound down, the reality of the situation began to settle in. The assassination attempt had failed, but the message it carried was far from lost on the president. Traoré had not only survived an attack on his life but had also exposed the enemy who had been hiding in plain sight. Morel, the man behind the plot, was now under lock and key, but Traoré understood that the danger was far from over. This was not just about one man. It was a warning to anyone who might think they could challenge him. The rest of the officers in the room were still processing the shock of the events. They had watched as their president, the man they served, calmly handled a life-threatening situation with quiet resolve. No fear, no panic. Just the steady hand of a leader who had seen it all. Traoré turned to his men, his eyes hardening with resolve. "I've led soldiers into real battles," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "And I've buried brothers in war. But this betrayal from inside our own house is worse than any enemy." His words, simple yet profound, echoed through the room, leaving a mark on everyone present. This was not just about survival. It was about something deeper: loyalty, honor, and the price of leadership. As the night went on, Traoré remained unshaken, his thoughts clear. Morel's capture had sent a message, not just to his own officers but to anyone who might think of challenging him. He had outsmarted an assassin, seen through a carefully constructed plot, and shown that his leadership was unbreakable. But he knew this was just the beginning. The shadowy figure of Le Chacal was still out there, and there were more enemies to confront. Yet Traoré was undeterred. He would not be broken. Every assassination attempt, every betrayal only strengthened his resolve. His leadership would endure, his country would endure, and he would always be ready for whatever came next. Because in this world of shadows and danger, survival was not just about fighting. It was about standing tall, unflinching, no matter the cost. The sun had begun to set on the palace, casting a warm orange hue over the rooftops of Ouagadougou. President Ibrahim Traoré sat alone on the palace's rooftop, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The stillness of the evening was a stark contrast to the chaos and tension of the past few days. His mind replayed the events, the assassination attempts, the betrayals, and the silent strength that had seen him through it all. He knew the fight wasn't over, but for now he had survived, and survival was a victory in itself. The door to the rooftop creaked open, and Captain Zongo entered, his face calm but with a slight hint of concern. Traoré turned to him, acknowledging his presence with a nod. Zongo had been by his side through it all, his most trusted ally. Without him, the past few days would have unfolded differently. But now it was time for the president to turn his attention to the future. "Sir, it's time," Zongo said quietly. "The military academy is ready for your address." Traoré stood up slowly, the weight of the moment settling over him. He had led the country through turmoil, but now it was time to impart his wisdom to the next generation of leaders. He turned one last time to the view of the city before heading down to the courtyard. In the National Military Academy's courtyard, hundreds of young cadets stood at attention, their faces a mixture of curiosity and admiration. They had heard the whispers, the rumors of attempted assassinations, of betrayal from within, but they did not know the full extent of the president's survival. Today, they would learn more than just military strategy. They would learn about honor, trust, and the true cost of leadership. Traoré walked to the stage, his footsteps steady and purposeful. The microphone was set before him, but he did not need notes. He spoke from the heart, his voice carrying through the courtyard. "Some of you may not understand the weight of the uniform you wear," he began, his gaze sweeping over the young faces. "You think it gives you power, but it gives you responsibility." He paused, raising the same ceramic teacup that had nearly ended his life just days ago. The cup, once a symbol of betrayal and death, now stood as a symbol of survival and vigilance. "This cup almost ended my life," Traoré continued, his voice steady. "Not because of the tea inside, but because of the trust one placed in the wrong hands." The cadets stood in rapt attention, their eyes fixed on the president. Traoré could feel their curiosity, their hunger for knowledge. But it wasn't just knowledge of tactics and operations he was giving them. It was the understanding of what it truly meant to be a leader. "You will one day guard this nation," he said, his tone growing more resolute. But guarding it is not just about guns and weapons. It is about honor. It is about knowing when to speak, when to stand firm, and when to say no, even when money is offered, even when pressure comes from abroad. He looked at Zongo, who was standing at the back, observing silently. "I did not survive because I am clever," Traoré said, turning back to the crowd. "I survived because I never forgot one truth. A nation is only as strong as the loyalty of its lowest guard." He placed the teacup on a stone pedestal beside the Academy's flag, a final symbol of survival, of strength, and of the future he was entrusting to these cadets. "Let this cup remind you," he said quietly, "that even the smallest item can carry betrayal or courage. Choose what you carry." As the cadets saluted him, some wiping away tears, Traoré felt a sense of fulfillment. The next generation would carry on the fight, the values, and the lessons he had learned. His job was done, at least for now. The next day, as Traoré sat quietly in his office, the weight of the past few days slowly faded. He knew that the battle for his country's future was far from over. The shadows of betrayal would always be there, lurking just out of sight. But he had prepared the next generation. The young cadets would take his lessons and carry them into the future. He had shown them that survival was not just about fighting the enemy, but about guarding against the quiet dangers within. As he looked out over the city once more, Traoré knew that, whatever came next, he would be ready. The lion of Burkina Faso had been tested, but he had not been broken. And as long as the teacup remained, as long as that symbol of survival stood, he would continue to guard the country with unwavering resolve. If you enjoyed this thrilling tale of survival, betrayal, and leadership, don't miss out on future stories. Subscribe now for more gripping narratives, detailed analyses, and exciting new content. Stay tuned for the next chapter in the saga of President Ibrahim Traoré and the nation he swore to protect.